This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
And here we go. Class 8. Wow. I was thinking 8 weeks of Brahms, of course, isn't anywhere near enough. We've just scratched the surface. I make up a list of the pieces we couldn't cover. I think, oh, I never did a string quartet. Oh, all of this stuff, there are all these other choral works. Oh, all of this stuff, but I'm going to try to make up for some of that today anyway, as we bring Brahms into his last years. I was thinking about one thing about him is that, he made it to age 67, which is not that good. If you consider, for example, Clara Schumann made it well into her 80s. Joachim lived to very patriarchal old age, so on. Now, other people in his life, like Robert Schumann, of course, died quite early. But if you think about the fact that infectious disease was a lot more serious back then, it's still a problem now, but especially back then, pre-antibiotics, right? They had those problems, thinking of Schubert, who died of either syphilis or typhoid, we're not sure which. Chopin, died of tuberculosis, right? The number of people who died from cardiovascular problems, that includes Wagner, who died of a coronary occlusion, a very bad one. He had severe coronary artery disease. Mendelssohn, who died from an aneurysm. His sister also did as well. Clara Schumann, who also died from a stroke. So that's still a problem with us now, but of course now we have some technology to help. I'm here with you because of that technology. I've got a stent, and it's kept me going nice, hale, and hearty for the last 12 years, and I hope it will keep doing just fine. So people died of various things. The big scourges of cancer were very much part of their lives, of course. They had it just like we do. So when you think of it, really, it's not all that surprising that Brahms would make it to his mid-60s and not beyond. He didn't take care of himself. His diet was horrendous. And if he had any tendency towards high cholesterol, well, this is a funny little tidbit. It's on my list of sort of upsetting composer deaths that I have, and sort of weirdly, grimly funny ones in some ways. But that's Wagner. Wagner had what we now know as coronary artery disease. He'd get out of breath easily, chest pressure, pain, in his left arm, couldn't climb a flight of stairs. So his doctor said, well, your problem, Ricard, is you're just kind of weak, and no pep. So here's the way. Let's build up your strength. I want you to eat a whole lot of beef. And so he started chowing down beef like no tomorrow, and he died shortly thereafter of a heart attack. That's what they knew right back then. Nobody knew beans from cholesterol, and so this is what happened. Well, so Brahms did make it to 67. We could wish that it had another decade or two, but we sure got a wonderful time of it, didn't we? He left us an incredible legacy in that time, about a 35-year composition career. Now, one thing to remember about Brahms is that he was in so many ways a modern musician, in that he was fascinated in early music. He was almost borderline musicologist. In some ways he was. I think I told you last week, he actually did editions of early music. The standard edition of François Couperin's keyboard music, that's French Baroque composer, is Brahms' work. He edited that, and he made a lot of money as an editor of early music. He did quite a few editions, and his name is on the Handel Gesellschaft, for example, which he helped to found, the Bach Gesellschaft. He edited the Organ Musicus Fehling. He was really very much involved in this. Well, one of the things he was really fascinated with, of course, was Bach. Remember that the Bach revival had started when he was a boy, and had just built on and on and on. And by the time Brahms was an adult, everybody was rediscovering Bach, and Bach was on his way to becoming the titan that we now think of him. Brahms was instrumental in bringing that about. So the Bach-Gesellschaft, the great Bach edition of the 19th century, he was a major player in making that happen. Without him, it may not have happened. It's a wonderful thought. Now, it shouldn't be surprising that as a composer, sometimes he got involved in almost Bachian composition. And this is an organ work that he wrote. He wrote a fair amount of organ music, and he played the organ quite a bit. This is what is called a chorale prelude. Now, what that is you take a chorale, which is the melodies of the Lutheran Church. It's the chorales, which are like the hymns of that. And then you do an organ fantasy on that melody. This particular melody, okay, and I'm going to take you through it, is one that dates way back into the Lutheran tradition, way, way back. Here it is, and let's talk about it for a moment. He wrote these chorale preludes. Brahms began writing a series of those. He had probably written some of them earlier in life, but most of them were later. Chorale preludes, and in many cases, he used the same melodies that Bach had used way back in his day. He'd used Bach's melodies, and sometimes even the melodies that show up in the Bach cantatas. Brahms was using them as well. It's rather fascinating, really. The collection of all of these, there's about a dozen of them or so, were published posthumously right after his death as Opus 122 posthumous. They belong to the very last published works from his pen. Some of them date from his last few years, others are a little earlier. Now, Schmuck dich, liebe Seele is a tune by Johann Krüger, and Bach had used it as the basis for Cantata 180. It's one of the many. Most cantatas are based on a chorale melody. And I'm going to play you Bach's own setting of that melody. At the end of Cantata 180, the choir sings the chorale melody in a very simple block harmonization. These harmonizations are among the great treasures of our world. I use them to teach harmony all the time. They're like a textbook, and so on. That harmonization and the text, Jesu war Brot des Lebens, which is from the libretto for that particular cantata. But the melody is that grand chorale melody. Here it is, the Bach original from Cantata 180. Lovely stuff. German folk music is so strongly based in this. So when you hear that, that sounds almost Brahmsian, doesn't it? Almost. Now, Bach himself wrote a chorale prelude. Great big fancy thing, runs almost 10 minutes long. It's all these wonderful variations on the tunes surrounded by organ figurations. A lot of these were actually improvised on the spot by church organists in Bach's day. And he did. He improvised like crazy. And once in a while he sat down and wrote one out. And that's the chorale preludes. I'm just going to give you a little bit of it so you can hear the overall style. It's performed by Ton Koopman, the wonderful Dutch early music specialist. And this is a Baroque era organ. unchanged from the Baroque era together, except that I think it's got an electric motor now instead of a 14-year-old, doing that, You have to think how those organs got their wind. It was kids. Who did it, yeah. But so I'm sure it's got an electric motor now, but you can still hear the thing, all the air going through it. It's really cool. There's something really heartwarming about Baroque organs. So here we go. Wow, huh? Listening to that, it sounds very 19th century in a lot of ways. I mean, Bach's harmony was so rich, it could almost be that. Well, now the question is, when Brahms wrote his own chorale prelude on this, was he writing echt Bach, right? No, he wasn't at all. As a matter of fact, Michael Musgrave, who's one of our big Brahms scholars, he's one of your good sources, he says Brahms's response is to the aesthetic character of the Bach's works, including their spiritual associations, rather than to any functional purpose or imitation. So in other words, this is not some dry academic exercise. He's taking the gestalt, the spirit of these things, and channeling it into his own heart and mind. So it sounds like Brahms. But in some very funny ways, Brahms sounds like Bach, because that wonderful, deep German tradition is so alive in him. So I'm going to play it for you, and I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures of very beautiful church organs, including a couple that aren't church organs. And if you look very carefully, you'll see the Wanamaker's organ in there too. I couldn't resist. Okay. Yeah. Isn't that cool? That's a theater organ, a Wurlitzer. Lovely stuff. My own life as a pianist, I've only been very marginally involved with the organ, but in my earlier days, when I was a freelance musician, and like all freelance musicians, there's a rule: you never say no. They ask you to do anything, you say yes. That's it. That's how you get along. And so sometimes that meant playing the organ, and I have all kinds of stories about that. Some of them horrifying. But one thing I can tell you, if you've never been around one of these things, the big old-fashioned ones, what we call the tracker organs with the big mechanical actions, there's a very long lag between pressing the key and getting a note. It's like, bah! And then if you're in a big cathedral, the sound hits the back wall and it bounces back at you. Bah! Bah! Like that. It can drive you out of your mind because you try to chase the sound. And you keep slowing down. Because you're trying to get ensemble, right? You know, and it takes a lot of time before you can make that conceptual breakthrough. And I know I barely made it myself. I kept slowing down all the time because I was trying to catch up with my sound. So on. Fascinating things, big church organs. Well, Brahms wrote a fair amount of organ music. It's one of those big unexplored areas of his output. But there's really quite a bit of it. How interesting, huh? Now, this antiquarian zeal of his, which was such a big part, found a fascinating outlet. His last symphony. Last symphony. By the way, almost next to last. He did have sketches on a fifth symphony. He'd burned them. But still, the fourth symphony is a fascinating blend of new and old and its time. This fourth symphony. This I'm going to use a beautiful live performance of this, by the way, from Vienna. Now, the last movement of the fourth symphony, instead of being your usual rondo or sonata form kind of movement, is what is called a passacaglia. And to write it, Brahms dug into the Bach-Gesellschaft edition. And what he took was a Bach bass line upon which he wrote what is called a passacaglia. Now, a passacaglia, aka chaconne, is a form of variations. But in the variations, it is not the melody that is varied. What happens is you have a bass line that repeats over and over, like a tape loop, over and over, and you rewrite everything that happens on top of it, over and over. It's a very honored and ancient way of writing music. Cantata 150 has a passacaglia in it that has this bass line. Yam bam bi, yam bum bum ba, and he varies that constantly. Yam ba bum bi, dam 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 bum bum bi, bum bum. Bum, 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 ba, and so on, and so on. A good example, those of you who are opera lovers, Dido's Lament from Dido and Aeneas, that's a passacaglia. Yeah, it's used very, very often in the Baroque. It's a wonderful way of providing an underlying structure for music. So, by the Baroque time, it became synonymous with the word chaconne. You will sometimes hear people tell you they know the difference between the two. Don't believe them. And they say, oh, you know, the passacaglia, the melody's in the bass, and the chaconne, it's in an upper voice. And then they give you some sort of example. You see, this is a chaconne. Well, you can give examples. Hey, here's one where the chaconne and it's in the bass. You know, and they become synonymous. They're also synonymous with the term ground bass. Chaconne, passacaglia, ground bass, all alike, okay? And don't be suckered into thinking otherwise. The origins lie in the Renaissance, because the way they used to do dance music in the Renaissance is that they put out volumes of these bass lines, short volumes because there weren't very many of them. And you would take the bass line and you just vamped on them. And so you could sit there and vamp all night where everybody was dancing. Tons of that sort of stuff. We have one volume, which is very nice. It survived. It's called a Tratado de Glosas, which literally means a collection of bass lines. It's a fake book. That's what it is. And it's by Diego Ortiz, and he gives you a bunch of those bass lines and instructions about what to do with them. So it's a how-to book. And really cool, improv for dummies, sort of thing. It's great. And so we have all these. Well, here's an example of one of them. Here we go. Dum, bum, 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 bum. Yep, I'm sorry. So, but that's how you do it, and you can just vamp and vamp and vamp and vamp, and that's how they work. A very famous bass line was called La Folia, right? And people wrote all kinds of variations on that. Another one, which used a lot eventually, the Passamezzo Antiqua eventually became the tune Greensleeves, because they got that tune attached to it, right? So a whole lot of these things out there. So Brahms was dipping into that when he took the bass line from Cantata 150, added a few nips and tucks, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and he came up with this. Yam pa pa pa, ya pam bam ba. And he builds the last movement as a set of variations on that. It's a Passacaglia in the grand sense. It must have confused the daylights out of the Viennese audiences because the Passacaglia was totally obsolete by the 1880s. And I know the first time I heard the Fourth Symphony, I said, "What's going on in that last movement?" It wasn't anything that I could recognize, but in fact, that's what he was doing. Now, I would like to give you a wonderful quote by the marvelous writer Donald Francis Tovey. He's going to come up a few times. A wonderful commentator on music and a beautiful writer. As this, the Passacaglia, is one of the most ancient of musical forms, and as such is taught to young students at school, not in our world. Popular criticism assumes that, like the ablative absolute, it must be something extremely learned and difficult. Brahms desired a finale that was free to express tragic emotion without being encumbered by the logical and chronological necessities of the more dramatic sonata forms. Wow! Donald, wow. A good writer, and he's bang on. He needed that sense because it is a tragic finale. It's one of the very few symphonies with that. We're going to hear more from him a little later in a somewhat lighter vein. So, the last movement, we're going to just hear the first 12 variations. I have a lot of music today. So we're going to hear the first 12 as it goes through, and you can hear what he does with this for this is about the first half of the movement. Here we go. Bum, 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 Yeah. Here's a suggestion. Next time you hear this symphony, which I hope is tonight, uh, listen through the movement just listening for that line. And then thereafter, don't worry about it anymore. Okay? Understanding the movement does not mean always hearing the chaconne line in it. But that's a great start, because then you get a feel of how it's put together, and then listen to what happens all around it. What a brilliant piece it is. Amazing achievement it is. In 1890, he started saying, sort of informally, he didn't make any big public announcement about this, but he said he was going to retire from regular composing. He had just finished his quintet, Opus 111, and he said, I think I'm going to stop now. I think it was just grumbling, probably over the dinner table one night, but it might have happened. It might have happened. He started making moves like he wanted to wrap things up. He really did. One of the things he started doing is he started going through all of his unpublished music, bit by bit, and he decided what he was going to keep and what he wasn't. He knew posterity was going to be interested in him. So he went through things, and a lot of stuff wound up in the fireplace. A lot of stuff. It's amazing, really, how much. And a lot of his early music, his juvenilia, he did not want that getting out. It's too bad, because I would love to get a chance to hear it, but he didn't. So in some cases, anything he had, he just destroyed. But in other cases, if he knew he'd given something to somebody way back when, he wrote them and asked for it back. And very often he got it. And the minute he got it, fireplace, off it went. So this is why Brahms' catalog is so clean. There are very few embarrassments in it. For example, we don't have anything like Wellington's Victory, Beethoven's Nadir, right? We don't have anything like that with Brahms. We don't have all those funny little torsos of pieces like we do with Mozart, where he started a project and then it fell through and he just abandoned it. Everything is pretty much finished and polished and wonderful. And that's because he saw to that. Now, we can be upset about that, but it's his right. It's his music. And so he presented himself to posterity, this almost perfectly sort of polished output. So, there it is. But he didn't quit. Whew. He could have joined the ranks of composers who retired. There are only a few. Rossini, who retired when he was at his peak. Verdi, who retired but got talked out of retirement. And one who retired involuntarily was Sibelius, who had a writer's block in the late 1920s from which he never recovered. And he lived into the 1950s, and he never wrote another major work, But pretty rare. No, Brahms kept going. And we owe that to this fine man, this rather portly, bearded gentleman who played the clarinet like an archangel. Richard Mühlfeld. He had that kind of, apparently, that sweetness and lyrical beauty in his playing, such as we enjoy here in San Francisco with Carrie Bell, our principal in the symphony. A player of intelligence, of lyrical beauty, not a virtuoso, not a banger or anything like that, and someone who could take a rather recalcitrant instrument, because the clarinet can be a tough little puppy to handle, and turn it into this vehicle for exquisite music. Very few composers had ever really discovered the potential of the clarinet. Mozart, of course, had late in life, and that's because he had a clarinetist friend. It was Anton Stadler. Well, Mühlfeld not only brought the clarinet into Brahms's idea as a solo instrument, but he also, his great playing, got Brahms interested in writing again. Thank you, Richard. Because of that, Brahms wrote 4 extraordinary late works involving the clarinet. There are 2 sonatas for clarinet and piano. Sometimes the violists play them as well, clarinet. There's a trio for clarinet, cello, and piano, which has my vote as my all-time favorite Brahms piece, by the way. And a quintet for clarinet and string quartet, which, of course, is absolutely imperishably beautiful. I had to pick a movement from one of these. Well, I picked the one I like the best, so there it is. But the fact is, it was very important because, after all, this is the late Brahms at his best. So, the clarinet trio, which I've had the honor of playing on any number of occasions with very fine players, and the second movement, which to me is one of the most imperishably beautiful things ever written for chamber music or in music in general. Just glorious, glorious. So the Clarinet Trio in A, Opus 114, the official slow movement, but this is a piece that doesn't really have a fast movement, but still, in a really gorgeous performance, I might add. Now, he wrote the trio and the quintet more or less at the same time. They're very similar in style and mood. He was at Badischkel over the summer of 1891, and he wrote them on one of those summer vacations. The lack of virtuoso writing for the clarinet is one of the clear aspects of it. There are no hot licks in these pieces for clarinet. They are works that require finesse, lyricism, control, intonation. In other words, all the virtues of fine musicianship. All of that. Mohlfeld was very much like Joachim and Clara Schumann, the kinds of performers that Brahms valued the most. Players of intelligence, of taste, of reserve. And that's what he always admired the most. I think he was that way as a pianist himself when his chops were in good shape. The second movement is his most lyrical, at his absolute best. It's written in sonata form, but it's a very sparse sonata form. It really doesn't do anything fancy, you know. It's very much simply laid out, and he varies his primary theme every time it comes back. But I couldn't resist bringing in something kind of fun here because it has an interesting little characteristic. You know the sonata form: exposition, development, recapitulation. The rule of thumb: exposition starts in the home key, the tonic, moves to another key, a secondary key, to which it ends. The development moves us bit by bit back to the home key. The recap starts in the home key and stays that way throughout, more or less repeating the exposition, but in the home key. This particular piece, the recapitulation, does not start in the home key. It starts a fifth lower, in the key of G major. So it is what we call a subdominant recapitulation. It's a very unusual form, very unusual. But Mozart, Schubert, Schumann, a few other people really liked it. Sometimes they used it. The reason also is that it gives you more key contrast, a little bit more to do. However, I wasn't sure if I could do this, but I think I can. There's a technical reason why a lot of people think very badly of this. Here's why. I think I can do this. In the exposition of a sonata form, you start in the home key, if you're in a major key, and you move up a fifth to the secondary key. So like if you're in D major, you go to A major, up a fifth, and you stay there, right? Now, in the recap, you stay in the same key, which means that there's got to be a certain amount of rewriting because you've got to make it sound like you're changing keys even if you're not. The recap is the hardest part to write. That's the hard part, and that's where you find all the really cool stuff and all that. However, what if you don't want to write a fancy recap, or what if you're just not good enough to do it? And there are people that don't have the chops, right? Well, think about it. If your original expo starts here and it moves up a fifth, yes? Now, what you have to do is give it to your copyist. Say, Fred, take my exposition and move it down a fifth. Think about it. If you do that, then you're going to wind up back in your tonic key again. In other words, it's an instant down and dirty recap. You don't have to write it at all. And this is why a lot of theory people think very, very badly of the subdominant recapitulation because they view it as a coward's way out of writing a recap and so on. So it's got a very bad reputation in some quarters, despite the fact that Mozart rather liked it. One of the people who didn't like it was Donald Francis Tovey. And he thought that it was always the coward's way out. And so he called them degenerate recapitulations. I love that. Degenerate recapitulations. It's like it makes them sound like they molest children or something. You know? Degenerate recapitulations. It's because Tovey belonged to a time when sonata form, everybody really thought there was a holy grail of sonata form writing, and part of that was that you start your recap in the tonic key, and then you go through and you do all this cool rewriting and so on. So anything other than that, as far as Tovey was concerned, was wrong. And he's ignoring the fact that Beethoven began his recaps in all kinds of keys. So did Mozart. He didn't look at that. Or maybe he chose not to see it. I love him, though. one of the great wits. I mean, who would call it a degenerate recapitulation, right? You know, what a word. What a word. I looked up some quotes from him. This is in a volume about the Haydn symphonies. Very clever persons who take in music by the eye have pointed out. You know, it's a wonderful little insult, right? Or this typical product of Haydn's hilarious maturity. And my favorite, this Haydn. The introduction was undoubtedly in some former incarnation a saintly tabby cat, whom Thoth or Ra, or whatever deity is in charge of cats, has elevated to the heavens of Haydn's imagination. Wow, I think it's marvelous. This is the guy that was talking about the slow movement of Haydn's Surprise Symphony and described that little tune, yum bum 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 beep bum ba, yeah, as having an answerine solemnity. Answerine means goose-like. Seriously cool writer. You know, even if he got very curled-lipped Oxford disdain at things and so on, fun anyway. Oh, sorry, hang on, before we get into this. So we're going to hear the movement, this gorgeous, exquisite movement, with a chart, a full chart of it, to show you where you are in the sonata form. But it's not as important in this case. The form is, I think, quite clear and quite simple. The most important thing is the mood. My friend Larry Granger, once when I played this piece with him, he's a cellist, now not with us. Larry once described it. He said, you know, I always think of this opening of this movement as though it's a lovely sunny day and you're walking alone in a beautiful sunlit flowery meadow, very happy, just alone with your own thoughts. And that's the way he thought of this. And I always think of that way myself now because of the way that Larry described it. Here we go. Desert island music, no question about it. Could you imagine being Mofeld and getting that movement? What would you do? Just thinking what you could do with that. It's amazing stuff. Whole pieces. All 4 clarinet works. Don't leave home without them. There was enough time for one more little romantic spark. It was innocent, platonic, wonderful. It was with a singer named Alice Barbie. That's her there on the left, and that's our boy there on the right as he looked in those late years in Vienna. Wow, how we change over the years. He even accompanied her at Bissendorfer Hall in Vienna when she did a farewell concert, 1894, and she married a diplomat, and that was the end of her performing career. But we have a lovely lithograph of him accompanying her, and she was a very lovely lady. He enjoyed her company immensely. Many of his late songs, late lieder, were about these ladies that he sort of sparked a little bit. And this particular one, Opus 105, number 2, was written specifically for a woman who became a very good friend of his. A very special woman. She's impossible not to adore this woman. Her name, here she is, Hermione Spice. And she was a contralto. And she became a favorite. She was a leader singer, but was also she was a wonderful wit. She could match him, barb for barb. And I love the fact that he was very drawn to her, and she was obviously drawn right back, I don't know, sexually or not, but I love what she said it was her Johannes passion, which, of course, the Bach's passion according to St. John, right? The Johannes passion. Very intelligent, witty woman, And Billroth, remember his good friend, the surgeon, thought the two might have actually even been in love to some degree, but it probably was a very fine friendship. That's what I get the feeling. It was a meeting of minds and spirits and hearts. Had he been 30 years younger, 20 years younger, maybe something else would have happened, But at any rate, she was the inspiration for a lot of his late songs. Thank you, my dear. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Opus 105, they were all written for her. And they are some of his absolutely finest achievements, such as this fragrant, evocative song set to a text by Hermann Link. Oh. Jesse Norman. Mwah. Break. I would like you back at 11:09 and 27 and a half seconds. Thank you very much. Alrighty. As we arrive in the 1890s, his life grew sadder and sadder because his many friends, that big circle, people began dying. He outlived almost all of his friends. Karl Tausig, the great pianist he worked with, 1877. Notenbaum, who he worked with closely on a lot of manuscripts, in 82. Liesel von Herzogenberg, his wonderful dear friend, she died early, 1892, at only 44 years old. His dear friend Billroth died in 1894 after very bad pneumonia, which left him very much changed. And Hans von Bülow, the conductor-pianist who was such a staunch advocate, died in 94. People were dying. He was growing sadder and sadder as he watched his friends around him go. Clara Schumann herself, she was getting into her 80s. Still there, but frail. In 1895, Brahms paid a visit to her. She was living in Frankfurt. It turned out to be their last meeting. One of her daughters, Nancy, I believe, went into the salon room where they were and saw them just sitting there quietly together, not saying a word, just sitting there, just being together, in a quiet glow of togetherness. They had their ups and downs, of course, they did, but still. Clara had a stroke in March 1896, and she died on the 20th of May. That had to have been the most devastating blow of Brahms's life. For all practical intents and purposes, she was his wife. They were maybe not married. It had never been a sexual relationship, probably. But who's counting? He was. As of the summer of 1896, it was pretty obvious he wasn't very well himself at all. He was losing weight fast. That's always an ominous sign. His skin was turning very yellowish, as were his eyes. It was getting sallow and it began getting brownish bit by bit. What he had was liver cancer. Still serious today, very serious then, and it was causing severe jaundice. He was in very bad shape. March 7th, 1897. He was in the Golden Saal of the Musikverein, which, if there is a center of the Western musical world, it is that room. And he heard the great conductor Hans Richter conduct the Vienna Philharmonic in his Fourth Symphony. At the end, the audience gave him a standing ovation for something like 20 minutes as he stood there in the box. And it was really for him. The Viennese had never really liked the Fourth Symphony all that much. It was a little too hard, I think, in overall, and they'd been kind of reserved, but now that's all aside. They were applauding, of course, their great, great artist. He had been with them for 30 years, more than 30 years at that point. And as they stood there, as I said, he cried looking at that. I think they all understood it was one of his last times in public. Almost exactly a century later, James Levine conducted the Vienna Philharmonic in exactly that same symphony, in exactly that same concert hall. But fortunately, Deutsche Grammophon was there. He died at home on the morning of April the 3rd, a month later. The only person there was his faithful housekeeper. Frau Truxa had always taken care of him. He died peacefully, and for what we know now, he wasn't in pain or anything. But he died. At his last meeting, that last meeting with Clara, she played for him a number of the short piano pieces he had written over the last 3 or 4 years. They were short character pieces for the piano, and he gave them generic titles. If they were slow, he called them intermezzo, faster capriccio, a little bigger, he called them ballade. He had written every one of them for her. They're all meant for her, and they were all about her, I think, in many ways. Eventually, he did publish them. He put them together and grouped them so that they'd sort of match. They're not chronological. They're just a big group of about 20 piano pieces, but they're published in 4 opera, 116, 117, 118, 119, and they are a great, great witness to their long relationship, which has to be one of the most significant ever in the history of music. Here's what she said. He was my friend in the fullest sense of the word. I can truly say, my children, that I have never loved a friend as I loved him. It is the most beautiful mutual understanding of two souls. Yeah, that was to her children. She addressed it to them in her journal. We'll hear 4 of them. Intermezzo, 118, 117, number 1, we know Clara played that for him, the E flat. The big ballade, Opus 118, number 3, and then Opus 116, number 4, the intermezzo. I don't know if she played it for him or not, but I bet she did. Because to me, that one, that last one, that's the one that's really about her and him and their relationship. Pieces. Thank you. See you in April. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. There's our guy. I'll see you in April for the British music. Thanks a lot. Thank you.